All right, JD Vance and Tim Walz are set to debate in the vice presidential debates tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to it because I really enjoy these types of events. I think JD Vance is very good at debate, so I have high hopes for him, but I also have just a little vein of cynicism and skepticism that runs, just a little one, guys, that runs through my veins. And I always have higher expectations for people than they end up performing in these debates. But here's what I expect from Tim Walz. The most important thing, of course, for JD Vance is to understand Tim Walz's strategy, to be very familiar with Tim Walz's record, to understand what voters care about, and to make sure that voters who are watching the debate come away with knowledge of what Tim Walz actually stands for. So Tim Walz's strategy is to avoid answering questions. We know this because a CNN journalist asked him about it at a party and reported that his plan was to just avoid answering questions. You can watch this video.
Even last week, I was in New York at a fundraiser that Tim Walz was doing at an apartment there, and he said, after I left the room, I heard he said to someone who asked, how's debate prep going? He said, look, I was trained as a teacher. As a teacher, we're trained to answer the questions. We tell our students to answer the questions. That's not what this is. So Walz really trying to fit himself into this somewhat awkward always thing of a nationally televised debate.
Well, that should be insulting to us, to you and to me, that Tim Walz won't answer our questions, that he's deliberately trying to avoid answering the questions. It also shows that he has nefarious motives, ulterior motives. If he doesn't want to tell us the truth, why is that? Because he doesn't want us to know the truth, because he's trying to be deceptive and implement policies, impose policies on us that we don't want. So JD Vance has a very simple marching orders from me. Be disciplined about your messaging. Do not stray. Do not try to be Donald Trump. Do not try to have some persona that is unnatural to you. Just be disciplined in your messaging. What you want to do is highlight Tim Walz's record. JD Vance is fortunate because Tim Walz is a governor, which means that he has legislation that he has signed into law that he is directly responsible for. This is not something they're like, well, the majority of this and that in the legislature. No. Tim Walz is responsible for everything that he's signed into law. So what JD Vance should do is essentially use Walz to punch and pivot to speaking to the voters. For example, Tim Walz doesn't want to answer questions. Well, JD Vance should pose him yes and no question after yes or no question. Like, for example, he should say, Governor Walz, yes or no, did you sign a piece of legislation into law that denies medical care to babies born alive after botched abortions? Yes or no? Now, the answer to that is yes, and JD Vance should highlight that after Tim Walz bloviates, and he should also say, why aren't you telling the voters the truth about this? This is awful. 5 times a year in the state of Minnesota, babies who are alive are born and struggling for life on those tables, and doctors and nurses are denying them care because of your abortion agenda. You signed it into law. Every single issue, he should pose a yes or no question. Governor Walz, yes or no, did you sign a bill into law that allows children to seek transgender surgeries, transitions from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones to genital mutilation surgery in the name of the transgender ideology in your state without parental consent? The answer to that question is yes. And when Tim Walz bloviates, JD Vance should say, why are you lying to voters? Is it because you know that this is horrendous and you don't want people to know about it because they won't like it? He should make the point, JD Vance should make the point he wants to make to voters and just use Tim Walz as a punch and pivot to the point that he wants to make. He should say, Governor Walz, did you or did you not sign a bill into law that prohibits pornographic books from being removed from school libraries? And then JD Vance should read a portion of the book Genderqueer, which is the pornographic book that is always in these elementary schools. He should read it aloud and say, you prohibited this from being removed from a school library. Yes or no? And he should make Tim Walz own it before making the point to voter. And you can do this for everything from Black Lives Matter to Ukraine to the border, issues that voters care about. JD Vance should also, if the moderators are incredibly biased, he should highlight their bias, but not in the way that he seems like he's bickering with the moderators. He should not dignify the moderators with the response of bickering, but he should highlight it. He should say, I reject the premise of that question. It's incredibly biased. I want to talk to you about what's important, what voters care about, and then he should reframe the question to make the point that he wants to make. So call them out, hold them accountable, but don't bicker with them. If JD Vance does those things, if he stays disciplined, he stays on message, he doesn't try to be Donald Trump or embody a persona that he's not used to, he uses Tim Walz to pivot and punch, he highlights Tim Walz's very radical history and record, which is undeniable, then he should do very well in this debate. I'm excited for it, and I think that he can win in the eyes of the voters. I know that there's a history in campaign strategy that says a vice presidential running mate doesn't make or break an election, and there's truth to that. But Tim Walz is so radical, and Kamala Harris embraces so much of what he's done that it's hard to run away from it. And it's really a good messaging mechanism for Republicans to highlight to voters just how radical Kamala Harris is, because she often offers up word salads versus the undeniable record that Walz offers by signing these legislations into law, or these pieces of legislation into law.